Yeah, I'm seeing the page live there.
So one of you can see that that we're
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
Okay. And is it live then on Facebook?
yeah. We're seeing it live. I'm seeing it live, and I'm seeing your presentation here of grandfather and Evelyn. The picture there. Yeah.
Okay, so that's very good. Well, um, okay, then let me just say good morning to our visitors who are joining us in the public Facebook world. We've been trying very hard to get this live video working properly, and we've got many complicated components involved. And so, if actually one of our team can monitor to see that people are responding, that they can hear and see out there, that would be really great. Andrew or Ron, can you please do that? And uh, Um, we're beginning our live video with a prayer and a smudge as Grandfather William Commanda started his meetings. And I have posted here a photo of his grandfather with his daughter Evelyn. And unfortunately, Evelyn, I talked to her this morning, and she isn't able to talk to us via a telephone call this morning. But she sends her love and her best wishes for our Equinox meeting. She reminds us to always respect the Creator and all creation. And in that vein, because she's always been such an environmental activist, particularly with mining and tree cutting and prayer for the water. She reminds us especially to respect Mother Earth and the waters. She talks about her father's message of love and peace, and she reminds us not to buy and sell love, to remember the importance of the Spirit and to come to the message of the Spirit in each of us as we ask to find the ways forward to doing what we do in our lives, and reminds us that the Spirit is the energy that exists for each and every individual, and it's also the one that unifies us and brings us all together towards that energy that Grandfather William Commanda always talked about, Jinawe Daganuk. We're all interconnected. And with Mother Earth and caring for each other, we'll find our way to peace. And so that is then the message I've wanted to share from Evelyn. And
Thank you.
did that
Rich.
work out okay?
Yes.
That worked out okay. Thank
Mm,
you.
mm.
And now then, I well, welcome to everybody. And thank you for joining us for this live broadcast. It's been quite a long time since we've been able to connect. Um, and in part, we're remembering that when we last had our gatherings together, it was the time of the tornado of 2019. And it interrupted our last meeting at the Public Service Alliance Commission boardroom, even though we did continue with our gathering. We weren't able to do another in-person gathering after that statement from Mother Earth because COVID intervened. And after that, we were not able to access public spaces to host our meetings. So we've had quite a few years where the Circle of All Nations community has only been able to connect in via the online world, really, basically. And we're grateful that so many of you comment and share messages and keep the spirit of grandfather's work alive and share with us what you're doing. So much part of the ongoing energy of our efforts. And, you know, it was a few of the people around the Zoom link who prompted oh gosh, let me get that right, the recording. Sorry. Maybe I somehow managed to stop the recording, but where have I? I'll get back to that in a second.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your patience. It's a few people who gathered together that encouraged us to get going with this session today. But that doesn't mean to say that there aren't many other people equally important and relevant and would want to be joining and sharing their voices with the larger Circle of All Nations community. And so now that we've gotten a better understanding of how to do our live videos again, we invite you all to come forward and join us. Tell us when you want to share. Tell us what you want to share, and we'll be hosting these events with more frequency into the future. I want to acknowledge that this is the Equinox. This is also a day after the International Day of Peace. And I want to present a little video clip created by Jean Trudel from Cirque de Paix when he interviewed Grandfather Commanda in 2006. And it was a message for peace that he thereafter acknowledged and honored Grandfather with a peace award at the Montreal, in Montreal. You know, in 2000, the United Nations had declared a decade for a culture of peace, but following 9/11, it had slowed down on some of its peace activities. But many of the people who had participated in our gatherings continued to take the urgency of the message for peace to the United Nations, and they contributed to resparking a lot of attention from the mid 2005-6. And here now I'm going to share Grandfather's voice.
Okay. Tell us about your work with Culture of Peace since the Decade of Peace in 2000 with the United Nations.
Yeah.
You decided to start working and let people know about your Culture of Peace as well.
Very much, because I was talking about getting all colors of people. That's why we started Circle of All Nations. We have black people here, Chinese, Japanese, Mexicans, Algonquins, and anyone that wants to come, everybody's welcome. As you know, we organized this here. Nobody is charged to camp. We feed them. It's free. You could spend a week here and just bring your tent, and it doesn't cost you nothing. So it's coming more and more today to be more peace, and I'm glad to see that. As long as I be able to do it, it's going to happen. I know for a fact it will happen someday. It will happen someday because our ancestors, the grandmothers, long time ago in 1700s, they have these predictions. Someday you'll see the people, they were reborn inside Indian body, not knowing what's happening. But someday they will be born, these people, inside the Indian bodies, and they will be called rainbow people. Today, There's lots of that today. And they're helping the Indians to organize. There's hope everything that they do with us, because I think they were saying that time, the grandmothers that said that they will be the people that will transform their own government by talking to them themselves, their chiefs, the way chiefs will be transformed by them. And I believe that.
Now, your brothers in California celebrate Aboriginal Day on September 14th. Do you have a special message for their celebration over there? What do you want to tell them? You want to greet them and say hello?
Yes, I want to light my pipe for them. I don't know what hour they start. I suppose in the morning sometime. They must have a sunrise ceremony or something. And I would like to know the hour so I could smoke my pipe at the same time.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and for them. Together is always possible. We want to achieve to do good things. I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in going to smash the windows in Ottawa, in Parliament, or throw bombs on it. That's not the way to live. Tell the truth. Tell them the truth and love them anyway. You have to respect them. Someday they will understand you.
Now, September 21st is International Day of Peace. Can you tell us about September 21st and what it means for you?
I would like to remind always my young people, my young brothers, my young sisters, every day in our life while we live. Always thank the Creator for all the things He grants us, to give us life, give us health, and also to help our children to be able to keep their language and to talk about these things between themselves in a good way, not to plan the bad things, just to plan the good ways to teach each other, and then whatever it is, to work together. Jimmy West.
Miigwech. Um, yeah, thanks for joining me and listening to that special prayer. Of course, it brings back big memories of grandfather, his gatherings on his lake, and his perpetual quest for peace uh, amongst all people. And you know. Very recently, some folk have acknowledged grandfather through the creation of a bridge in the city of Ottawa. Um, in part, we want to remember all the people who have contributed to the voice of grandfather Commanda over the years, because his Circle of All Nations, his vision for a culture of peace was co-created by so many people. So many people not part necessarily of the visible acknowledgement of grandfather in the city of Ottawa, but nonetheless whose energies over the decades have in fact contributed to him being such a living voice. And I want to share this little blurb for you guys from my second book about Grandfather Commanda, Learning from a Kindergarten Dropout. And this was again from 2006. It comes as part of his message on June 21st, when he was presented with the key to the city of Ottawa on Victoria Island. And he says, you know, and funny, he does say some messages are ominous, but today, he says, I see three levels of significance that make me happy in the presentation of this key to the city of Ottawa. The city of Ottawa is acknowledging someone from the city of Maniwaki. The province of Ontario is reaching across the province of Quebec, and the National Capital Region, representing really the entire country, is opening its heart to someone generally seen as belonging within the confines.
Serena, Andrew, Winnie, Patsy Nicholson.
Sorry. Belonging within the confines of the reserve, the Kirigan Zibi Anishinabeg. I see the spirit of borderlessness growing strength, and I accept it as a symbol of hope. So I wanted to say the prayer really for this type of unity that we are now beginning to see embraced in the national capital city. The seeds were planted many decades ago, and it is one of the examples of the ongoing vibrance of the voice of Grandfather Commanda. I'm now just going to take a minute to admit a couple more of our guests into our Zoom chat.
Excuse me.
And let me see. I'm hoping they can come in. Serena, there you are. I did see Three Rivers, and I don't know where she's.
Yeah, just talk to her.
She's
there? Maybe because I had like a double. There she is. I have Three Rivers.
Yes.
They are on another call. There are several people on another call. So maybe you should hang up and they're going to call you again. Huh?
They're going to call me again?
Well, because I see here 2, 4, 5 people, including me, and I have another window.
No, we're only
Three Rivers.
We're only expecting Three Rivers to join on this Zoom.
Yeah.
So can you please?
I hang up with Three Rivers. I hang up with you, and you again. You go follow the link again, or they call you. I don't know how it's gonna work.
No, she has to follow the link. Thank you.
I'm gonna hang up. Okay. Okay. Good luck.
Thank you. Okay. So sorry for that interruption. We had tried to set up our Zoom connections in advance, but we're very glad actually to be welcoming our friend Serena, who actually
self-invited me.
Self-invited herself because she happens to be in Montreal, but she's our friend from Italy, who used to live here in Quebec and has been a part of the Circle of All Nations work for many years. And as I introduce her, then I'll say, you'll recall in that prayer that we just heard from Grandfather for Peace, he used his indigenous language, he used Algonquin language. And Serena is one of the people who's worked very hard globally to promote the languages, the endangered languages. And we'll talk more about that later. But let me just then also take the moment to introduce our other friends on the Zoom link while I wait for Three Rivers to present herself. Right up at the top alongside me is Ron Kijimakwa, who has been very patient over the last couple of days. helping me figure out how to do this Facebook Live Zoom. It's been a challenging process, and we've been trying many, many times to get it right. So I hope the public at large are seeing us, and if somebody can send messages to the Facebook link that perhaps Ron or Andrew can monitor to at least know we are doing okay out there, that'll be great. But Ron, thank you very much. And other than that, of course, Ron supported grandfather many years ago with the protection of an important sacred site for us. Ron also worked with grandmothers to create sweetgrass braids, and he used to bring, oh my God, huge bundles of those to the June 21st solstice gatherings that Grandfather Commanda hosted at Victoria Island. And he continues to share the seeds of that medicine, even as far as to our other colleague, Winnie, in Denmark, who's growing the seeds of the medicines. So the threads of the work that people have brought from their heart, and some of it inspired by grandfather, continues to grow in all sorts of intriguing ways. And so then let me just introduce and welcome Winnie. And so good to see you joining us from Denmark. Winnie actually sparked our activities with respect to the canoe and the canoe journey by connecting here with us first and learning about the sweetgrass from Ron and friends, and then going back to Denmark and tracking down grandfather's canoes at the Roskilde Museum, tracking down the director of the museum who had come and actually found grandfather, and I believe it was 1981, and who has kept the thread of the canoes connections alive. And we're very glad to have you here in the sense of also the full circle of the connection with the Vikings. You know, that is also an intriguing thread of reconciliation in part of the Grandfather William Commanda journey. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But welcome, Winnie, and thank you for persisting in ensuring that I do this, that I do try to do the live video again. Super to have you. Finally, let me say, actually, it was Andrew who contacted me okay, let me just admit our friend, Three Rivers, Patsy Nicholson. Okay, Andrew, by the way, then has joined some of our work at Victoria Island over the years, joined most of our Circle of All Nations meetings at the PSAC building, Hi Three Rivers, a PhD student in legal studies. He's also taken a strong interest in our friend Donald Marshall Jr. And Donald Marshall Jr. is the person we always honor in September. The 13th of September was the date of his birth. And he, of course, is the person whose activism led to the fight for justice for Indigenous peoples, he himself having been incarcerated for a murder he hadn't committed for 11 years. He fought alone to reclaim his name. There were several justice inquiries that eventually resulted in that. He became a part of the Aboriginal Justice Learning Network and built bridges of reconciliation with people in the criminal justice system, the lawyers, the judges, the correctional officers. Despite the costs of that experience to him and his family, he was also the voice for claiming of the rights of Indigenous peoples. Andrew will talk a little bit more about that with respect to treaty and stuff like that later. Donald Marshall Jr. was also a strong participant in grandfather's vision for the Circle of All Nations, for the Asinabka, for peace building, and brought children to our gatherings. In fact, some of them join Three Rivers in the cook shack at our gatherings. And so the energies of the Donald Marshall legacy, and especially his prayer for youth, his articulated in his Donald Marshall Youth Camp, are part of the seeds that we continue to support and share. Um, and thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. And then may I introduce Three Rivers. Many of our Circle of All Nations friends will recall her in Three Rivers Inn, the cook at our gatherings. But of course, Three Rivers' journey with grandfather started much before that, when she participated in the Sunbow 5 walk. And it's this that we are talking about celebrating today, this notion of the journey of life, that we say is continuing as we learn, as we grow, as we make mistakes, as we redevelop our friendships, as we redevelop our own internal personal strengths. And so, Three Rivers, thank you too for joining us. I know you're going to be sharing with us in a few minutes. And I think I'm going to just kind of leave it like that. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to get you to talk in a little while. But I want to now just go to the PowerPoint presentation, just so that I very briefly present grandfather to friends who may be joining us and may not know all about him and his history and work. And then we'll be engaging in the discussion from our colleagues. So now I hope this screen shows up first. And here I'm saying that grandfather is our cybernetic digital.com elder. Actually, we called him our .com elder from 2000 because he was the first person to have a website. But I researched that word cybernetic during my last decade, and idea of the guiding and the steering is an important symbol of grandfather's work, and the canoe is a particularly prominent, in fact, a keystone example of that motif, presenting itself time and time again through his own work and through his own life and through our work moving forward. And in this process, when I've started to, I also wanted to engage in the cognitive mapping, the mapping of a journey forward with respect to respect for Mother Earth and respect for each other. And the canoe motif continues that. Of course, had I been better prepared for today, we would have invited Valerie Poyen, who created his canoe video. And actually, perhaps I'm doing this all wrong. Pardon me for a minute, people. I should be actually sharing my screen. Let me see if I can do that. More.
On my version is on the bottom.
I've got it. Share screen. And there it is. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So yes, is that working okay, people? Can you see?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, I can see you.
You can see the
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
No,
Okay.
I can't see anything but you.
Oh no.
Can you not see the PowerPoint? Let me see. Something's
The PowerPoint I'm not seeing.
okay.
I can see it. I see it with the On the sides, I see all the slides and the big screen on the right.
Okay, so then I'm just going to carry on, and it will be recorded, so you'll catch it later if you aren't seeing it right now, Three Rivers. And I hope our people out there are seeing it. Okay, so basically, I'm going to race through it actually because it's something people can go through later. As I said, the last in-person Circle of All Nations gathering was hosted at the time of the 2019 tornadoes. Then coronavirus isolated us further. Grandfather's work for decades to alert us to acceleration in climate change and environmental crisis of global impact has taken form much as he had anticipated and predicted. And we're all now in a rather challenging state across the world. 3 decades after the Rio summit, where he in fact did the 3 days of pipe ceremony, when the world came together to advance more judicious exploitation or relationship with the environment. Grandfather talked about a relationship with a living Mother Earth, a living Gaia, and ignited that spirit in many people. And it's that work that we hope will continue to inspire the COP Conference of Partners climate action meetings into the future. We're 7 years into the United Nations projection for sustainable development, and we've got very short time to be addressing those sustainable development goals more effectively. And Grandfather's voice in prayer remains with all colleagues in that regard. But 3 decades after the Rio summit, three things predominate in environmental issues: the voice and place of the indigenous, Western domination of thinking in a world on fire, and global connections and interrelatedness of problems, and also the interrelatedness of solutions. So for grandfather, nature was always the teacher. Many of you will know how we organized his work consistent with the Circle of All Nations medicine wheel, where we moved from a place of vision to a place of action, an animation of work to a place of reflection, and to a place of reflection, greater wisdom in cyclical circles again and again. I have presented a chronology of grandfather's work in support of Mother Earth, and it started really in 1945. And his journey continues in the academic world, where we've studied him and presented some of his teachings in the zone of cyber cartography. And I have here several books documenting our work on Facebook. And Three Rivers, you like to see this one, because here you and I and are there in Maniwaki with Bob Bob P. And this is a Facebook book which shows how we've been online, and there's grandfather like online, a live presence. So we take the cyber documentation to heart in his cybernetic guiding us on. And this then is part of the thread behind our cognitive mapping in the canoe journey, the canoe motif that has been so important in his work, contributing to the ephemeral performance mapping that he's implanted on so many of our hearts and our minds. And one of the ways we've expressed this is really through the image of explaining how indigenous peoples called North America Turtle Island, and how we from 2003 we tried to explain that to people at large in the Circle of All Nations work. And that these images are now reflected in a geospatial trade magazine. So grandfather's voice is reaching people in different domains, different work sectors to this day. he did his canoe teachings at the Smithsonian in 1976. In 1978, I have a newspaper article where he connects the canoe making with the environmental challenges that he saw looming, because he notes that the birch bark quality threatens old Indian craft of canoe building. At the 2000 World Summit on Art and Culture, his message was, because of pollution, birch bark and cedar were dying, and he could not practice his canoe craft as well as he could, as he wanted. I'm not going to talk too much more about this here, because Winnie will talk about the encounter with the Danes, Queen Margaret, and grandfather's canoes. And of course, I mentioned Valerie, who created the Good Enough for Two documentary, but it was created in connection with Todd Labrador, who is the other person, had I had time to organize properly, we would have invited to join us here. He has joined us in previous chats about the canoe, and has helped keep the spirit of this work going. In our academic work, we've also introduced the concept of photo atlasing to draw together the graphic work that together with the textual work that contributes to grandfathers reaching people at multiple dimensions, not just people in the academic world, not just people in the indigenous world, not just people in the grassroots world, but people by and large at multiple sectors, because we feel that we all need to be part of the journey of taking care of Mother Earth, taking care of each other, and bridging between different knowledges. And here then you'll see in a cover for the Cartographic Association, Canadian Cartographic Association's report. And there in the center of all the GIS maps, you see an image of Grandfather Commanda with his 7-fire wampum, because the wampum too is a story about migration and movement, and it is very much a mapping, but it's also a mapping in terms of ideals. And finally, I want to mention that in 2017, the University of Ottawa, under the leadership of Dr. Scott Simon, hosted the International Anthropology Conference. And the focus of that conference, the underlying thread, was the theme of movement, of motion. And Grandfather Commanda was honored in that, in the documentation of that conference, such that all the international guests were exposed to some of his thinking. And some of us participated in a workshop to bring together grassroots and others into that discussion. And I'll finally note that I point out here at the bottom that William Commanda's grandson, Andy Dewashi, just recently in 2002 created a musical canoe video honoring Tara's canoes. Okay, and now I'll stop sharing that screen, and I shall go back to our Zoom session. Okay, and I think now we're ready to move on, but I guess people, can you see whether there are any questions or comments from the public out there that we need to respond to or attend to?
I'm not seeing anything right now, Romola.
Okay, thank you then. So then maybe I'm just going to pass the mic over to you, Ron, to commence the discussions for the Zoom meeting. And I'm going to change the view to speaker, and away you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so greetings, Quay. My descendants are also from close to Maniwaki. We're related to grandfather William. And 3 generations up, my great-great-great-grandma is a Commanda. And her daughter was married to Simon of Lac Simon near Milchineville, Quebec. And these people back then, they were talking about a lot of things, living, and everything was very harsh, living in log cabins and whatsoever. And the one thing that really piqued my curiosity at the time was the way that my great uncle talked to me about that back in the 1990s, about how they used to do all these birch bark canoes, and they used that a lot to do their travelings on the rivers, which were their super highways. And just to briefly go back to what Romola just said about what grandfather William had mentioned, the pollution and everything that's eating away at the birch bark. And that is very true today, that it's barely feasible to collect any birch bark. There's only one person I know in Maniwaki at the moment that can still do canoes, and I don't know how he goes about in collecting his birch bark. But either way, that's Pinnock. And other than that, it is a lost trade in my family. The last one that was taught how to do birch bark canoes was my uncle, Gaetan Fournier. And that trade didn't get passed on to our generation. However, my great uncle did show me how he did his models and his patterns and such. And he was very nice at the time to also share with me some pictures of the day when they used to do canoes back in the 1940s, which is the presentation I will give you briefly. I got about a dozen pictures, different pictures that I will show you in a moment, about those days when they used to harvest the birch bark and make the canoes. And he would be making large canoes for the scouts of the region, and the other canoes he would make would be sold as a livelihood to the cottagers that were starting to pour in back then in that area at Lac Simon and Lake Gagnon in that area. So I'm just going to switch over here to the presentation briefly, and if you have any issues, just let me know if you're not seeing it. And so let me just see here. I'm just going to do a reversal. There we go. All right, so as you can see, I'm gonna see if I can do it this way. Here we go. Okay, so this is my great Uncle Joe here, back in the 1940s. And he has Olivier Simon there with him, and that's some of the canoes he made. And they were just playing around and showing that to how that, in the day when they had to do the pictures. But as you can see, they were using different methods. There's a piece here of, I'll use a pointer. There's a piece here of birch bark that you can see in the background right there that they'd be working on. And they used also cedar roots to tie and put the bindings here in the canoe. So that's how it was done. And that's on his land, of course. And I'll share to the next picture. It's a bit fuzzy, this one. Those are 3 of his famous canoes. And as you can see, he loved to play music. He played guitar, harmonica, accordion, and was a happy-go-lucky guy, this Uncle Joe of mine. I met him, luckily for me, he was 98 when I spoke to him, and he showed me all these pictures. And I was able to capture that from a video camera back then. That's the technology we had. And here he is, testing his balance in one of his made canoes, and his trademark, he put always the North Star on the tip of his canoe. And one of his trades that he worked also, not just making canoes, he would be working the log drives, and just like mostly everybody in the day when they had to work on the Gatineau rivers and the rivers around to unjam the drives, the logs and all that. So yeah, he did a lot of trades. But as you can see, we're getting back to the canoe, how he really did put a lot of work into them, back then. And the pictures came out really nice when I got them. And here he is again with his accordion. He liked playing music back then. And I don't know if he was fixing this bicycle in the background, but anyways, that's irrelevant. But as you can see here, this long canoe behind him, that's a little longer canoe than the standard one next to him here. This long canoe here was mostly made for when he used to tell me, for the scouts, because of they bring that to the scout camps, and he made a lot of those canoes for the scouts. He was a very proud man of sharing these canoes. And another one here, here's three nice crafts that he made. Whoops, sorry. He would make the paddle too, by the way. He didn't just make the canoe, he'd make the paddle, and the paddle would go with the canoe. So, and of course, this is in the 1950s. It's a bit fuzzy, but this is what we call the canoe races. In French, we call it a regatta, and that's the canoe race. He's standing right here. My great uncle Joe, that's one of his canoes there. His canoes were very unique because he would make the bottom flat. And when I asked him, how come the bottom is flat versus like being sort of rounded off like all other canoes, and he said, well, it helps to glide better onto the waters. So he had his own trademark of doing his own canoes. So this was a canoe race back in the 1950s on Lake Gagnon. There was a Anishinaabe name that it's got lost in the words. Here's another one. These pictures there, they're all getting ready for the race. And there was another picture that I was trying to locate where my grandpa, Pierre Fournier, and yes, Saint Canard Blanc, which is a white duck. They used to do the race, and that year, well, it's my grandpa that won the race. So, and that's that for that presentation. So to get back to, I'm just going to go back to video here. To get back to talking about the canoe, there is a representation in how it represents things in life. As far as I know, this is what I can discuss here with how the canoe had such a big symbolism in our history, and old Chief Louis Tenasco of our region. And I'll just switch back briefly to the presentation here. Whoops, this here. If you can see the canoe here, this is the flag of our Wescarini Nation, which is the people of the deer. Now the canoe, as you can see, there is all that like marks in there in the canoe. Those represent the villages in what they call La Petite Nation, which is a little nation of the Algonquin people on the other side of the Gatineau River of Maniwaki. So we're on the eastern part past the Gatineau River. So I just wanted to share that with everybody, and because it has a lot of meaning, the canoe to us. It is not just a mode of transportation, but there's also a spiritual meaning to it. And anyways, I wanted to share that with the people about the canoe. There was so much, this is how they used to, actually I forgot this picture here. This is where they used to peel the birch bark out of the tree. And I asked my great uncle, I said, did you ever kill trees by doing that? And he said, well, funny that you asked, because a big birch tree, and as you can see, that's a big one back then in the 1940s. You can barely find any big trees like that today due to pollution. But back then they knew that how deep to go into cutting the birch bark, and they would leave like 2 or 3 layers behind. So the layers would be about 4 or 5 layers thick, because there's about 8 or 9 layers, you'd say, depending on they would know as soon as they started cutting how many layers the tree had. So they always left about 2 or 3 layers. Now, if you look at the layers, what they represent, it's like 1 layer is a year's growth. So if they did go back often to the same tree, they knew how to cut the layers so they wouldn't kill any trees. They knew all this. You know, they respected the nature big time. And even the roots from the cedar and all that, they never killed anything. The trees would still grow. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. So that's my presentation on the canoes, the old days, the way the canoe was done. And I was so honored to have met my great uncle. He was 98 when he passed on, and he did make sure to share these knowledges of what he did. When I visited him back in 1995, I kept visiting him and asking questions and take videos and did his life story and all that. And it's still like Grandfather William. They all followed the same route, working with the Singer Company. The Singer Company, which is the ones that make also the sewing machines. This is funny, but in our region, the Singer Company back in the 1940s would hire people to go and harvest logs for their paper mills and all that here in this region. So I think Grandfather William also worked for these people, and a lot of Anishinaabe people worked. That was the work trade back then. And they would send these logs down the Gatineau River to the paper mills here in Ottawa. So, and not just Ottawa, but all over the place. And here in Ottawa, there was different methods they would be doing. So, but that was the trade. And so anyways, yeah, that's my presentation. And I want to say miigwech to all for having listened and taking time and patience to try and understand the day of the old days, how things were done. So miigwech, Romola.
Thank you so much, Ron Chimakwa. Thank you very much for a very special presentation. I know at other times, you've brought forward to us so much of the history of the people of the Algonquins, some of the threads of the story that are lost to many. And I know at one point you talked about, being deprived of a right to your heritage, the kind of genocidal thing that happened to many people here in Canada. And I know I've heard that from you over the last decade, and I'm glad to see we have an opportunity to share your voice and share the voice of Uncle Joe Fournier and bring it to life, because really this is the work and the heritage that Grandfather wanted to see honored and respected. I just as a sideline, when you talked about protecting the roots and things like that, I'm remembering the first time I was engaged with the canoe building at that Valerie and Todd were involved in. And all of a sudden, we were driving around somewhere, and Grandfather said, "Stop the car." And he said, go dig. And he was wanting me to dig the spruce roots so that he could see how straight they were growing, to see whether we would be harvesting those to sew the canoe. And my first response was, "What, with my bare naked nails?" And yes, he said, and that's how I plunged into canoe making. And this is the way so many of us were obliged to learn from the land in altogether intriguing ways by Grandfather Commanda. Thank you very much. I can see Three Rivers is enjoying that one. May I now turn it over to Winnie? Winnie?
We have no audio.
Um,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
okay, and we should see you on the big screen now. Are you there? Here you are. Okay. You can start. There you are. Perfect.
There I am. Good to know I'm here.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for that you're doing this, Romola. It's really great. And in a short while from now, I will speak about what happened that actually motivated me to push you to do what we are doing today. So, but first of all, I will say hi to everyone, and I will begin this presentation here, what I'm going to speak about, with a little story. And I will add some other stories, but this story here from my from my background, I am educated as a constructor, machine constructor, but life took me out on a path where it took quite a big of turn because I was, I'm born as a person who are very skeptic in my nature. But life took me out on that I should bring out wisdom about animals and what we can learn from them and nature and being in touch with ourselves and others and so on. And it brought me into to finding out of and proving that animals can diagnose themselves. They can communicate about what is going on in their body, and they can communicate about us as people. They can communicate about the trees and all kind of different elements. And it was really good for me to see all those proofs about that it was possible, and it is possible. So I have veterinarians' words and customers and so on. And I'm telling you this because now I'm bringing you into what brought me to asking Romola about if we could do this here. I got to know you for many years. From many years ago, we met in Canada, and you run. And the sweetgrass are doing well, Ron. It's growing well. Yeah. So, but Romola, I was working here, and Shinto, my master, he was born into the pony body of a pony. And he taught me to write about a story from my life, a story where I was going to share with the public that for years ago in 2015, it was, I was signing a book we have brought out, The Wise Animals, the Sentient Animals. And I was going to write about what he asked me to write in that book to Marianne, the owner of the book. And I can post it on my wall later. But what he asked me to bring out were that he told her that he was glad she was there, together with us. And then he told her that she was going to Africa, to Karen Blixen's farm. And we were looking at each other, and she said, "Oh, no," she said, "I'm not going there. I have no plans and it cost a fortune," and so on. And then destiny created that she came back to me later on. I have goosebumps all over when I'm speaking about it. And she said that she had actually got a journey for free to Africa, to Karen Blixen's farm. So it was like, okay, Shinto, how can you do that? How can you read the future? How can you do all this kind of things? And the day where I was writing about that, something came up about you, and I could feel that I missed to be in touch with you. And then I saw a post about that you actually were in Africa. And then I thought to myself, there is something here we have to catch up on. And around the same time, a crow came, and I was out on my bicycle, and a crow came and gave me a message about that I should catch up with you and tell people about what animals they know about love and the importance of love. And now I'm leading us back to the tour with the canoe. Some people might have heard about what happened, but one of the things that happened were that when the reason for that I got on this tour here, I've explained it to you, Romola, and others, and you have a lot of material, so I won't go deep into it. But what happened was that I was guided to taking that tour, and I'm very glad I did, and that you could use the material. But on my way to this chief from the museum, to Jens Gamby Messen, who did visit William, and we're hanging out with him, and we're arranging. He met our queen here in Denmark and her sons, and so on. When I was on my way to him, I could feel that the energy were leading me off the road to Jens' house. And it was leading me into a spot where I should take some time to just be. Just feel nature and be. And there were a crow, we say. And that bird was so intense and so tuned in about time and all kind of things. And I was like, wow, so what you actually are doing here are that you are inviting me, dear bird, to take a break, just connect again even more with nature and be present. And I was there just sensing with that animal. And I was aware, my brain was saying, hey, what about the time schedule? You have to go and meet Yen. And then at one point, the crow gave me, okay, now it's now. And I knew, okay, this one is tuned into a higher wisdom about how we navigate in life and how to get to where we shall be. So I did listen, and I took my tour. And when I arrived at Jens' place, he was looking at his watch and say, oh, you're really here on time. I was there 1 minute before we had arranged I should be there. And why am I bringing this in? I'm bringing it in because we can learn something from nature. We can learn about listening to the rhythms of nature, to our heart, to our being, to being present. Because when we are present, we also are capable of connecting with ourselves a lot more. And when we are connecting with ourselves a lot more and nature, then we also got to realize when we are getting off track from our heart and start to, for example, pollute, create a lot of pollution to earth and so on. So when we are in contact with heart, animals, they navigate from contact with their heart. But what do? How busy are we in our world? How much do we care? Kindness comes from a place in the heart. So what is going on in our society, in the world? So I want to bring in that when I had Shinto, when I was living with him, he took me out on the field. He walked over and he wanted to show me how he connected with the world. And I will give you a story from that time. And the reason for that I give it is that there are a point in it. So I bring it in as a story first. The story are that I should communicate with an animal, a horse, far away from me. And the owner, I didn't knew anything about him except that he had that horse. And then I began to communicate with that horse. And he was at Sjælland and I was at Jylland, and I brought in this example and a lot of other stories in the books and more material on the way about why this is so important to be capable of doing. Because it could teach us about our own bodies and sickness and health and so on. But here, when I was in that process with this horse here owned by that man, Shinto, he came to me and he said, Mom, he's having another horse and that one is having a tendon problem and he must get the veterinarian to help that horse. And I was like, what? I was sitting there in the middle of the forest and then my pony began to talk to me about a horse I did not even knew existed. So I had to contact that owner and I said, hey, do you know what? My pony, already there, people are either open or not open. But he was already, open to communicating with animals. And I said to him, my pony have told me that you have another horse with a tendon issue and you have to get the veterinarian to help that horse. And he was almost screaming in the phone as oh my God, you're freaking crazy. Ooh, you know, not crazy in a bad way, but it was like pushing him, you know, over his, you know, experiences in normal life, you know. I'm living a normal life also, but his regular life was kind of pushed into another area by this. And then he said, do you know what? I do have another horse. And I have figured out that that horse do have a tendon problem. So it was a kind of, you know, wow, how do he do that? You know, how do Shinto do that? And he taught me about how we can tune in and what level we are reaching. You know, if you're bringing out the image of the canoe, when I found the canoe, it was in a box. It had a lot of white kind of ice. It looks a little bit like ice bubbles. I don't know the word of it, but we say skum. And it was around the canoe. And if you look at that canoe and what Shinto did, if we want to know something about nature and we tune in and we tune into ourselves and we tune into how it's good to be around and who is good to be with and what about our own body, then perhaps we tune in a way where we reach what is surrounding the canoe placed by other people, or we tune in to the canoe and the material of the canoe and where the material are coming from. And what Shinto taught me were that we can tune into different layers and how to do so. And I'm bringing this in because animals, they are in contact with their heart, they are in contact with love. And from there, with the tools Shinto taught me about, you know, what animals can, we can also tune into what pollution are doing. We can also tune into the common, you know, the big energetic network we all are part of. We can tune into food, the food in the store. We can tune into what a tree is good for. So we can do all those kind of things. And tuning in were leading me to the canoe and leading me to bringing out informations to you people. So what animals can do are, I shall bring in a story more. They can do so much. And one of the things that Shinto he taught me were, we were standing out on a field and he had already told me and showed me how everything is connected. You know, when you are breathing, you can't survive without oxygen. What are we doing when we are creating pollution and we have to breathe in? Hey, what about that? Our bodies are part of the field. But we were out there on that grass field and it was quite windy that day. And what he did were, I told him, oh my God, Shinto, this is a really strong, I think it was an east wind. It's many years ago. But the point here are that we name the wind as the wind coming up over to us, against us. That's how we look at it in society. But what he was saying were, we don't say that it is that wind. We mention it as the wind from the opposite corner. So what he taught me there were that animals are not walking up against the energetic field. They are not walking up against themselves. They are walking with the heart, with the wind, with what there are. And to feel themselves is to feel how to navigate. So if we bring this in, then, you know, in this here, we are talking about peace between people. And if we are entering into our heart, when we are from our heart, we want peace because heart is peace. We want to be together, all of us, to create a better world. So the thing here that animals are doing are teaching us about how much we actually can learn from them. How can we navigate with nature? The canoe are built by nature. It's not abusing nature. It's saying thanks to nature. So I hope it makes sense what I'm telling here and how I'm bringing it together. So this canoe here, it brought me, brought me out on a tour where the crawl was there. And then Shinto came in and were leading me to you, Romola, and were giving me a hint about you, and you were in South Africa. And then the crawl came, which is represented ethic, behavior, and morality, and being able to follow heart. And we're talking about love and how we all are connected with hearts. So why is it that we are destroying some people or the environment we are going to live from, survive from? Birds, Tree told me that when a bird is singing, it activates the branches. So it's all connected. So it's beautiful, but do we see it? So I would like, before I end my presentation, I would like to also add that a cat told me about what is time, how is time built. They know so much. And before we continue with the next person presentation, I would like to invite all people here to just take a moment to touch your breast and to feel your heart, to feel 5 things about yourself or others that really make you feel good feelings. Take 5 things. You can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We just take a minute, just breathe and feel good energy. And then I guide you back when the minute is over. Feel good connected. What can make you feel good? Light up your world. So did you find 5 things? I hope so. But Romola, this was my presentation from Animal Kingdom, and it was quite different today. And they are working for peace. They are trying to connect with us. Think about that they can diagnose themselves. Think about the power in if we all learn to do that. If we all are so open. When animals enter over to human beings, when a dog is doing that, they're sending love to activate the heart, to activate good contact with good feelings. Animals, they bring healing. They activate, we are more in contact with our nature, which is goodness. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very, very much indeed for such a warm and passionate presentation, Winnie, and for bringing the voice of nature and animal and our connections with that animal world to us. Reminds, of course, of grandfather's Jinawe Daganuk word, we're all interconnected, and how we can be strengthened by understanding and acknowledging and embracing that connection. Thanks for doing that. I just want to make a couple of quick points. I know we're moving along with the time, but when you mentioned Africa and Karen Blixen, I just watched the movie Erengard, and some of the artistic work was done by your queen, Margaret, through her
Oh,
decoupage, and it's part of the backdrop of the movie. The movie is called The Art of Seduction, and it's quite an interesting art movie. But the backdrop is that her creative energy is part of that movie version of the Karen Blixen story. So very beautiful connections. And actually, I was thinking about that in the context of when Grandfather Commanda met Queen Margaret. He was building his birch bark canoe for her. Perhaps I should have started off with Jan Scamby in the context of what you say about time. And he was most anxious to get a birch bark canoe built for the Rascaldi Museum. And he heard about Grandfather Commander, wrote to him, got no response, found a way to fly himself over and find Grandfather. Arrived in the airport, eventually found his way to Maniwaki, to the house, sat on the outside deck in the winter, waiting, but Grandfather wasn't there. It was quite a few hours later that Grandfather returned home from the bush, then invited him in. Then they had a long conversation, and late at night discovered he had no place to stay, and he ended up staying with Grandfather for those few days, and that's how they forged that friendship, which eventually took Grandfather and his wife Mary to Denmark to build this canoe for Queen Margaret. And then Grandfather had, on the occasion that the canoes was finished and they were presenting it to the Queen, she brought her two sons there, and she had them kneel before this chief commander. And you know, it was like a recognition of something very significant in human relationships that he sensed there. And she held his hand for the longest time, he says, no gloves, you know, a direct connection. And he asked her, how many colonies do you have? And she said, oh, none whatsoever. We gave away the last one, Hurunland. And Grandfather said, in his cheeky way, well, then I wish you were my queen, then I'll have my country back. But that was a very special moment, and her artwork continues in the thread of this conversation in such a contemporary way. Thank you so much, Winnie.
yeah. Can I add one little thing?
Only one quick second, okay?
Yeah, Yen he told me, you know, you have the interviews, but Yen he told me that when William should figure out of when to go to Denmark, he was, you know, getting in touch with, you know, consulting the stars about figuring out when to go here, you know, and that's the same, you know, with the animals. They also so tuned in. I just wanted to add that.
Well, thank you. It helps me make a point that we are doing this event on the equinox, the fall equinox, and really for the last 25 years almost in the city of Ottawa, we've acknowledged the cosmic world constantly. So we've raised awareness of the spring and the fall equinox, the winter and the summer solstice, the new moons, the full moons, the fact that we're connected so much, we're cosmic beings. And I always acknowledge Abuela Margarita, who reminded us at the gatherings that we're cosmic beings. And just yesterday somebody was talking to me about, you know, the moon, and how we disrupt the energy fields of the moon with our engagement there. And just recently, there have been these major spring tides in South Africa, way larger tides than we've had before, very destructive ones, just where I was visiting in Africa. And on the one hand, people talk about, you know, the climate change and the melting of the Arctic, the higher water levels and things like that. But in this process, we're also impacting the gravitational pull of the moon on the tidal waters. and that has impacts on so many things. So yeah, so thanks for bringing all of that to our consciousness, and for reminding us about that cosmic linkage that we need to always honor and respect. Okay, so now for something totally different. Over to you, Andrew.
Wait. Well, first of all, I want to thank the people that have delivered presentations. Unfortunately, I just wanted to point out that I'm going to have to leave right after my presentation, just because I have a commitment early this afternoon, so I have to attend to that. But I just wanted to start very quickly with a story that was written by. Well, actually, I think it's more important that I kind of start with how I kind of came into this overall discussion on sort of prophecies and treaty histories and what have you. So I'm currently writing a thesis that's kind of comparing and contrasting some of the numbered treaty agreements there over on the prairies, particularly Treaty 7, and contrasting that with more modern interindigenous discussions or treaties, particularly the Buffalo Treaty. And one of the things that my supervisor by the name of Danica Littlechild told me was that she really wanted me to get involved or really read into a lot of the discussions that elders have had on treaty negotiations. So, for example, you would have elders that would be involved who would have, let's say, ancestors involved in treaty discussions. You would have, let's say, someone's great-grandparent involved directly, or let's say someone's grandparent who was maybe 7 or 10 years old at the time of the treaties being negotiated. So she wanted me to really engage in those discussions. And one of the things that I found when engaging in those discussions, at least in the context of the number treaties, was that elders talked about how the treaties involved were very religious in the way that they were structured and the way that they were put together. There was a spiritual component to them, in that a lot of elders talked about how their creator would be directly engaged in discussions between indigenous peoples and the crown in particular. Scholars have talked about it as a kind of tripartite agreement. And so in the event that the treaties were actually broken, the idea was that elders would talk about how there would be severe consequences that would kind of rain down on all the people that were involved, because the creator was directly engaged in these discussions. So I really was intrigued by that discussion. I was intrigued by a lot of the kind of prophetic elements of that discussion. And in relation to this particular talk today, I found that I was trying to identify a way upon which Mi'kmaq discussions, in particular, around their own treaties, could be sort of animated through this kind of prophetic link there. And so I think that's an important kind of way to start, in particular, just as a way to pay credence to Donald Marshall Jr., because when he was initially arrested in the early 90s, for fishing eels for with a supposedly illegal net and what have you, he immediately told the RCMP or DFO officer on the scene, well, I don't need a license, I have a treaty. So it kind of speaks to that long-standing historical thread. But I'm just going to start really quickly here with a part of a story by a Mi'kmaq writer who unfortunately passed away, by the name of Lawrence Simon. And this is a story entitled From Stones and Switches. And the story begins with two Mi'kmaq men living in the Depression. And they're talking about how talking about how they imagine themselves and their community living in the time of the time of the Book of Revelation, as talked about in sort of the Christian Bible. And these two men begin their discussion here. So it goes, suddenly Megwadesk asked, "Do you believe in that Bible stuff, eh? All the miracles like Jesus raising the dead?" "Sure, I believe in Jesus," Skolch answered, not at all surprised by the question. He had been expecting something like this from Megwadesk. For such an uncanny fisherman, Skolch thought, Megwadesk still asked the foolish questions of a youth. "Can you believe in a God who will make everybody rise stark naked and all rotted on Judgment Day, eh?" Megwadesk continued. The growing sunlight made him bold. He could voice his secret horrors now. Sure, Skolch answered with feigned impatience. He was pleased, actually, for this opportunity to wax philosophical. A conversation with Megwadesk was always good for that. But you shouldn't worry about them details. Let the white people worry about all that stuff. We didn't have nothing to do with his murder. As far as I can see it, on Judgment Day, Jesus will come down on a cloud and he'll go to all the reserves first and tell all the Indians to just keep right on fishing. That's all. Then he'll get back on his cloud again and fly off to Trenton and go deal with the white people there, and everywhere else there's whites. And by God, they'll pay for killing them all right, and for killing all the land and all the rivers and all the fish and leaving none for us. They'll pay. Jesus was a fisherman, and don't you forget it. He knew where to set his nets too, even better than you, I'm sure. He understands us, so don't you worry. So interesting. So it's a very intriguing kind of take on revelations and what have you, and sort of prophetic teaching. But I think it kind of illustrates a fundamental distinction. So being baptized Catholic, we kind of understand that this world is very much a kind of a passage point to lead us to kind of the next world, and kind of determining, okay, well, based upon your behavior, whether or not you live up to certain teaching, you're sort of slated to wind up in one particular world or another. And I think that kind of linear path, in regard to my own understanding and my own reading, doesn't really correspond to sort of a Mi'kmaq understanding, or even a broader indigenous conception on time or revelation or what have you. Because obviously the main thing we all understand here is that, the point of emphasis is resides in your relationships with the world therein. There is no wasted movement. There is no wasted energy. There's no, path. There's no way to diminish the importance of these relationships. We don't say that. It's not said that, oh, these relationships will lead you to this sort of ideal path. It's more that you're meant to develop these relations therein and live up to the obligations that, have been assigned to people through creation. And that's what's most important. So I can, even drawing on upon another example, with someone like, I know it's a totally different context, but someone like Leroy Littlebear, a Blackfoot scholar, talking about how, well, indigenous peoples tell time maybe 2 days forward and 2 days back, but everything else is kind of open to constant development. Everything else is open to kind of constant change. And other people have talked about how time isn't necessarily something that can be split into a clear past, present, future. It can't be sort of aligned into a series of moments that can be split apart. It's rather more about it's more important to understand it in regards to unfolding and constant, again, as I use the word development, but again, just this unfolding, very imminent phenomenon. And that's where the relationships come into play, because they could take on a myriad series of forms. They could take on a constant process of development. So going back to that particular story, that passage that I read at the outset, it's interesting. We have this kind of distinction between, okay, well, these people here will experience sort of the brunt of revelation. They'll experience judgment, but we'll just be told, go right on fishing, do what we've always done. And it speaks to that process of that relationship with the land and taking up those relations as was always done. And that's what's most important to think about in regard to that distinction, in regard to time, because again, it's always open-ended. It's always kind of subject to that process of, again, so I don't want to say evolution, because that's not an ideal word in this context, but again, just unfolding. And prophecies as such are instructive in nature. They're not punitive. They're not demanding. They're instructive. They're meant to teach. They're meant to guide. So when people read a particular story, when they look into an oral history, they're learning about, okay, how did the people before us understand what took place, understand the world around them? How did they interact with it? And in turn, how did they, develop proper relationships with it? What were the mistakes that were made? And how do we avoid making those similar mistakes in our lives as well? Because they understand, okay, people made mistakes back then. And like a classic example would be how people overhunted to the point where animals themselves just moved away from the community. They just refused to be hunted anymore until new agreements, new covenants had to be made with animals to determine, okay, well, they cannot obviously be overhunted because that would lead to severe consequences that would have generational impacts, right? So those are just examples of how people understood prophetic relationships with the land around them. And treaties themselves with animals, with other nations, with the entire world are essentially done in such a way as to entrench those relationships through generations, right? And notice how I'm not saying through time, but more through generations, because relationships can take on a myriad of forms and develop through time, but they're not done in such a way as there's a clear beginning, middle, and end to them. And so that's what's most important. And so when I thought about this particular framework in relation to the peace and friendship treaties that the Mi'kmaq people had negotiated or taken part in negotiating with the crown, in generally, I would say maybe a 40 to 50 year period from 1725 through to maybe 1779, we find that, there's a similar impetus there, because a lot of scholars talk about treating with settlers and treating with the crown almost as akin to opening the circle. And that's a very important dynamic, because when you're not just taking part in a kind of limited contractual negotiation that can be rendered null and void at any time a term is broken. No, you're bringing in somebody into the relationship in very much the same way that you would conceive relationships between siblings or parents or what have you. And, all kinds of scholars have really emphasized that relational aspect. There's a reason why kings or queens or what have you would be referred to as mothers and fathers, but they would all be bound beneath that creator. And that's the dynamic that's really important to take into account. Disputing with family members, disputing with siblings, that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship is to be severed. It just means that it's taking on a new shape, a new form, right? There's a reason why, when looking at a lot of the Mi'kmaq treaties, there's a reason why you would have renewal ceremonies that would take place, every so often. Back then it was every year. Even looking ahead to a totally different context with the number treaties, there's a reason why annuity payments would have to be given out year in and year out to reinforce those commitments, right? Those commitments change, but the commitment itself is always there. It's eternal, because you're bringing in a new party within this relational order. And now you're obligated to carry out those relationships and respond to the changes that may need to take place to ensure that they always remain strong. And that's what's very important to think about. So when thinking about these treaties, think about them as well as sort of corresponding to that relational aspect, that there's something that allows them to develop over time. Like, just to give one last example, there's another reason why, when these agreements were put together, in particular, let's say the 1760 treaty, that was at the heart of the Supreme Court judgment involving Donald Marshall, from in 1999. These agreements were put together in 1760. One of the things that was most important to think about was that there were young people that were there at these negotiations. These were young people that were there that were obligated to understand, okay, this is what was negotiated. This was what was drawn upon. These were the terms that were established, not in the actual written text, but in the oral agreement. Because all the written texts were there to do. All they did was just basically signal the Crown's intentions. But that's not enough to really understand what went on. So to have young people there to pass down these teachings to, consecutively, generation to generation, is exactly the same reason why Donald Marshall Jr. Responded to that RCMP officer by saying, again, I don't need a license to be able to fish with a certain kind of net or to be able to fish at these times of year. I have a treaty. And you see these disputes taking shape now too, with Mi'kmaq fisheries in Sebeganekatik and other communities too. These disputes, unfortunately, have gotten violent. But this is kind of the core of which these communities are kind of making their case. And so Donald Marshall Jr. was obviously a key figure in these disputes right now. But I just wanted to provide again a little bit of a discussion of the kind of cultural, political, historical roots that have kind of animated all of this. Because again, these disputes are still prevalent today because people view treaties as a way that bound parties together through generations, and that couldn't be broken whenever somebody said, "Oh, well, these have no relevance today." Well, who's to say? One party says they still have, if one party says they're still relevant, then it certainly doesn't mean that they're irrelevant. So those are just some thoughts on these discussions here. But again, I want to thank everybody as well for their great contributions, and thank Romola as well for putting all this together.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew, for that inspiring presentation there, and bringing us.
Sorry to interrupt. One last thing. If anybody's interested in the book of which I got that story, here's what it's called here. It's called Dawnland Voices. So Dawnland obviously translates to Wabanaki, people of the dawn. And it's Dawnland Voices, an anthology of indigenous writing from New England, and it's edited by Siobhan Senior. So in case anybody's interested, it's a phenomenal text that just goes through a lot of, some of the teaching of various East Coast indigenous peoples.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you for, bringing the Donald Marshall thread into our discussions today in such a interesting way. And I know you've got to go, but we'll hope to keep in touch with you, and all the best with the schoolwork.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
take care, everyone.
Thanks for helping yesterday, too. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Bye-bye. Now let me turn us over to Three Rivers. And just to make the connection, I remember one year Donald Marshall Jr. brought a number of kids to the gathering, and one of them helped you in the kitchen, all gathering, and they had a search for him to take him back, right? Something like that. So, yeah, the connections of our work continue. Three Rivers, great to see you. Okay, I have to make sure you're not muted. You have to unmute yourself, Three Rivers. You see at the somewhere you'll see a red.
Serena is unmuted.
But we're looking for Patsy to be unmuted. Unmute.
Maybe she has to do it herself.
Yes.
First, at the bottom, you have a little image of a microphone. You have to
Okay. Am I good?
Yeah, you're perfect. Thank you.
Somebody pushed the right button and it came up.
There you go.
Well, here's your little southern touch for this get together. And for those of you that don't know me, I am grandfather's cook. If he ever introduced me, it would be, she's my cook. So I did cook for all the years that the gathering went on. And I established many lovely connections and friendships and family. I call them family. And I really miss them. But there was a couple of things I wanted to share about the other people that had spoken. For Winnie, I wanted to tell you a story about grandfather and the crow.
Yeah.
One year we were sitting on the back porch, the screened-in back porch, and he would sit there and he would tell us stories and stuff, and the crows were really screaming and carrying on that day. They were talking a lot, and he said, now watch, because one crow flew over. He said, somebody will be here in a little bit. And then the next thing you know, two crows flew over, and he said, then there will be two more. Please forgive that noise. It's a something in my phone that I can't get rid of. he said there will be 2 crows that will fly. The 2 crows flew over, and he said there will be 2 more people here soon. And then in a few minutes, 3 more crows flew over, and he says, boy, we're going to have a crowd today. Well, what he said really happened.
Yeah.
Just as he said. So every year from that time on, I would pay attention to the crows that on the days when the gathering wasn't happening. I would pay attention to the crows to see how many people were coming. And then a little while after that, my son and I were driving away from the house to go to town. And in the big field in front of the house, I saw something glint. It was almost like a spark that flew. And I told Michael, I said, stop, I've got to go see about this. So I ran out in the middle of the field, and I got this crow feather.
Wow.
So the crows and it stayed with me all this time because the crows tell me things, you know. And the crows are noted to be on the borderline between the spirit and the human. So I mean, life. And so I pay attention to the crows and follow what they're telling me. And that's one of the things in my journey, my canoe journey, that has happened is I pay more attention to the animals, and they tell me how to live. Not only the animals, but the plants too. And things have changed a lot in my life. But another funny story about Romola and the roots for the canoes. Romola was a city girl when I first met her. She hadn't been involved in a whole lot of that outdoor stuff. So I thought that was sort of humorous about him having her dig up the roots, because that was how Grandfather taught us. If it was things we needed to learn, he sent us to do them. Even though it might seem like, man, this is not me, this is not what I do, he would send us to do them. And then it was almost like he would look for the lesson that we had learned in that. So I'm going to start weeping if I talk about him, because I still miss him very much. But in my kitchen, in the first years I was in it, I felt a little like I should be teaching a lodge or something. Because, you know, I did walk across America, followed Grandfather across America. And you learn a lot on a journey like that. And I thought, well, there's things that I need to be able to teach. I figured out by the time that in the many years that I did it, that was my lodge. I was teaching people. They called my kitchen the Magic Kitchen, because we would bring together people when we would get back there and we'd cook and we'd have fun with it and we'd laugh, and we didn't let people that were angry stay there. I would send them to the wet lodge or to the prayer circle, because we didn't want to put the anger in the food. We wanted to put the love and the laughter and the happiness in there. So that was kind of the way I followed it for those many years that I did it.
Thank you.
The canoe, Grandfather told me about the canoe, and I asked him what the symbol of it was. And he said the symbol of the canoe was our journey. It symbolizes our journey in life. And I thought that made really good sense. I have canoes all over my house. In fact, when my children, Michael being one of them, moved me into a 2-room apartment, I had to pack some of my canoes away. But they wanted to put me, I'm in a retirement apartment complex where everybody's old like me. But the thing that I find in my dealings here is no one here speaks my language. They think I'm weird a little bit because I don't follow theirs. But I try to bring them love. And when they start talking about the things that involve hate, which is what's happening with our world, there are 2 things in our world. There's love and hate. It's our choice which one we follow. And when the hate comes forth and people get attracted to it, it also shines like this blackbird feather, like this crow feather. They get attracted to the hate and all of the things that are being said with that, and then they start acting in weird and strange ways, and then they want to dislike people and try to tell everyone what to do. I was raised in the Pentecostal Holiness Church until I was 14 years old. And I left the church because it didn't speak my language. Even though I didn't know what my language was, I could not accept what they were saying. And when I found the native way, it spoke to me greater than any other thing. And we went on the walk because some of the native people had said, if you really want to learn, you have to go to the true people. You don't read it in a book. I discovered everybody in Tennessee had read the same books I had. You have to go find the true healers, native people, and learn from them. Learn from the people. And that led me to the walk, because I thought if I was ever going to really learn what the tradition was, that's who I needed to be with. And it was not a wrong move, because I found William Commanda there. And so the one true thing that I think, and I asked Grandfather, what is the lessons you want us to learn? And he said, we want you to learn how to be a good human on this earth. And if you think about it, sounds very simple, doesn't it? But it isn't, because we have to dig into ourselves, and we have to find all of those ugly little creepy things in there that want to make us think we're better than everybody else, or we know better than everybody else, or things of that nature. And we have to learn how to put those aside and to accept everybody and everything for what they are. I have this thing about when people want to try to make a disagreement with me, I say, that's your problem. It's really not my problem. And I'm not going to wade off into it, because I'm not going to argue with them. They wonder about me because I don't get into the rumor circles up here. I just don't feel like getting into the rumor mill, you know? So the true thing I have is what I have learned in the past, and the things that I have from that, and the memories that stay with me and help me to be able to be strong, even though this walker can't walk anymore due to accidents and the inability to get my leg fixed to be able to walk. Went to the orthopedic doctor the last time, and something had popped in my knee, and it was just in extreme pain. And he looked at me and he said, what's wrong? And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just cut this off and put a stick on it and let me get over all this pain. And he stepped back like I had struck him. He didn't find any humor in that at all. I thought it was funny. So, yeah, I think in my kitchen I told stories, and I learned stories. And I remember the sisters. Romola, do you remember the sisters that came every year, and they were in my kitchen every year cooking? And they finally made me sit on a stool in the middle of the kitchen and direct. They wouldn't let me get up there and work with them. They would get up there and do the work and make me sit on the stool. And blessed memories. Blessed memories. So thank you. Love you all. I'll try to see y'all again the next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing. And for people who were not part of our gatherings and who may not have quite an understanding of what transformative moment in time there was for those who engaged in the gatherings, preceding the gatherings, grandfather was the spiritual guide for the Sunbow 5 walk, where people joined in the walk from First Encounter Beach in Massachusetts, and over 7.5 months walked all the way across the country to Santa Barbara, California. And Three Rivers, Pat Nicholson, and her son Michael joined in the walk and became part of the cooking and the teaching and the sharing throughout. In 1996, grandfather's always hosted gatherings, and we've talked previously about his initial one in 1967 in Eganville, his massive gathering in Maniwaki in 1969, and then gatherings happened at a slower pace. But in 1996, the big gatherings resumed, and many of the people who participated in the Sunbow 5 walk uh, rejoined, and more people came to these gatherings. I went to the first one in 1997 after I had met grandfather in the context of my justice work. And he invited me to this gathering, and initially I was most reluctant to go. And I was ducking and dodging, and I said, well, I don't exactly know why I'd come to a spiritual gathering. I was working hard enough on Native justice issues like just about every day as it was. Well, he says, yeah, that's a $64 question why you'd go. A week later, he was asking me again, and I was still dodging. And he said, anyone can learn. And so I became immediately very humble. I rented a station wagon. I put my foam headboard in the back. I bought granola bars and orange juice and went camping. And I say, lucky for grandfather, he didn't send me to the far parking lot, because you remember, to prepare for these gatherings that he hosted at his lakefront home, where people would come from all over the world and camp out. Um, the gatherings got bigger, the parking lots got bigger, and it was just like a massive, amazing experience with thousands of strangers gathering together and becoming friends and making feasts, learning and understanding about indigenous peoples, indigenous justice, nature, um, prophecies, participating in healing gatherings, creative work, teaching, storytelling. And Three Rivers kept the Three River Inn cook shack going, feeding the volunteers, feeding the elders, and feeding all the crowd on a Sunday feast through the remaining years of the gatherings, which continued till grandfather died in 2011. And so those of us who participated in those moments of time are transformed in ways that most other people who haven't had that experience can't be. And it's very good that you help me and help others to explain and share, because really we need so much more of that kind of relationship building and energy returning to take its place in the global world. And yeah, this International Day of Peace is a good time to spark this further. Thank you, Three Rivers. Now
Thank you, Romola. One little thing I wanted to say about when you first came to the gathering, because I'd already been there, and grandfather told me, he said, I finally met a real Indian. He talked about you.
well, thank you, and I mean, that's an important thing. I was actually talking to some newcomer kids in Winnipeg, where, okay, let me just say, I'll go to that later. But that thing about identity is important in many respects. And being that kind of Indian has not always been easy in the indigenous world. And so it's been like a battle of, maybe 25, 30 years to negotiate and find rightful place. And that's what we all need to do. We need to find our rightful places, and we have to have the strength to do that. And thank goodness we had so many of those circles to participate in, which gave us both the right and the responsibility to take our places. So thank you so much for that reminder.
Yes, and my skin is white, but my heart is red. So that's the way I say to people.
Thank you. Okay, now let me go to Serena because we are rather prolonging our meeting here. Serena,
Yeah.
thank you. You've stopped on the highway for a long time now.
Actually, I invited me to the meeting because I wanted to follow it, and I wasn't sure how I was going to join to listen to it. So when I saw the link to the Zoom, I said, "Well, okay, I'm gonna follow that." And he asked me if I wanted to launch the meeting. I said, "No, it's not me." So I was waiting. Then I got with Three Rivers. I'm so happy to see you again, Three Rivers. She's not only the cook of grandfather, she was making miracles because we would arrive there. She had this little shack, and then she had outside for a restaurant for over 1,000 people. It was a small space. Well, she didn't know what she was going to cook. She didn't know where the food was coming from. And she didn't know how she could handle that of cooking for hundreds of people. And she managed it without being a bit nervous, like maybe I get nervous if I have 5 people for suppers. And she was there. That was a big lesson. And so I spent some time outside there peeling potatoes, peeling carrots, getting to know people, talk to people like Gaston Lavoie. I don't know if you know about him, but he had worked in Italy for a while. So I was in Quebec, and I won't tell me everything. It's kind of long, but I really learned a lot for those. I went, I think, to 3 or 4 gatherings, and then it was a bit harder for me because I moved closer to Montreal. The first years I was in Mont-Laurier, which was closer to Maniwaki. I think I met grandfather without really being aware from some meeting that happened in Mont Tremblant with Anish Nabe, and it was that like a pre-spiritual gathering, sometimes around the early 90s. And then I went to the one when I got, because there was no publicity about the meeting in Maniwaki at Lac Bacoupé. No publicity. We just knew it was the first weekend of August, and something connected with the moon too. And so I went, and I really learned a lot. And I don't know about, I don't want to take more time. I just thank you for this occasion, Romola, and hope that there will be more. And I'm really happy that I went through this. I learned a lot of things. The most important thing, I'll share that with you, is that I come from Italy. In Italy, people have an idea that you change things by fighting. You have to fight. And when they talk, they can be very aggressive. They can be very polemic. They need to show like how much they're mad with somebody. And so when I met the grandfather at, I think it was that commission that went for reconciliation. And I was there, and I was somehow translating. It was a little group, and I speak French, and there were, I think, some Spanish people too. So I can manage these languages, and I translated, and I was really, I got like, I think at that time I told grandfather, I think it was the first time I was speaking with him. I said, grandfather, if you need like to go somewhere or something, you can call me. I thought I was far away. It never happened that way. But from then on, I kept in touch. Like sometimes I would go through like Bacoupé. Once he wasn't there, they told me he's in the hospital. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to the hospital and say hello. And so they told me, bring peppermint and bring raisin. So he likes them a lot. So I stopped at the dépanneur and brought that stuff. And that time I remember I had learned about this horrible thing about blankets with measles that had been presented to the communities, and which were infected, and they would bring measles, which was a bad. European were accustomed to measles, but Indian communities were very fragile and to that kind of germs. So, and then I thought, he would be mad about that. There was no word of hate, of resentment, of vendetta, as in Italy. He was just so open to everybody, and it really make me feel at ease, and I learned a lot and met a lot of nice people. Some of them are still friends. Romola, we haven't seen for many years, but we keep in touch by Facebook every once in a while.
So,
I'm happy to be with you today. Thank you.
well, thank you. Thank you very much. And I guess the thread I remember in your story is that when you had first met grandfather, you had talked about languages. And
Yeah.
then when you came to his gathering some years later, he
Yeah.
remembered that you were the person engaged
Yeah.
in indigenous languages. So you were
And
surprised that he had such a strong memory of you
yeah,
and the
can recognize
indigenous.
me among hundreds of people.
Exactly.
I
And
remember
and
that.
and that was really very much his direct connection, his deep connection with people. And then,
Mm.
of course, I just want to finish that one off by saying, so grandfather always spoke first in Algonquin, then in French, then in English, and he embraced language and he spoke multiple dialects of Algonquin. And he talked so much, so often about the importance of the preservation of indigenous languages. And he said, if we lose our language, how do we um articulate the concepts that are in our heads? Already so much has been reduced by the languages we're obliged to use, the French and the English. He says, my language is so vast, Romola. And I just thought that word vast was so earth-based. And any combination of words could lead to a whole complex of meanings, pretty well much the way as our Zoom meeting has evolved, really. Each of us has shared different threads, but we want to add more to this story because there are other connecting points, and that's how his language was. It was that vast. And uh, I'm now going to be working over the next year, and maybe all of you can help me to identify all the firsts that grandfather Commanda leased and unleashed into the world, released. But one of the things was his persistent fight for indigenous languages, and he had the official languages commissioner of Canada uh, asked to meet him in 2010. And that was the first time in Canada we moved beyond English and French. We realized there were other languages that were important. And grandfather planted that seed there. When he went to the United Nations, he was part of the first United Nations Conference of Indigenous Peoples, the Cry of the Earth Conference, even named as such, Cry of the Earth, because Indigenous peoples wanted to bring the attention to the dire crisis that they saw the Earth moving towards, and that's 1991. And and grandfather did the opening presentation, and he spoke in Algonquin, and he had himself translated by his assistant, Frank DeConti, in those days, Three Rivers. And it was, I think, in 2019 that the United Nations eventually declared the year for indigenous languages. So I'm tracking it as one of the seeds planted by other people, but definitely planted and nurtured by grandfather. And just much like I said earlier, the bridge of connection between Quebec and Ontario, and in this capital city, that spirit of connection, again, another seed planted by grandfather. So, as Andrew was saying, there's prophecy, and there are moments where things can continue to evolve. And right now, climate change tells us we're in a place where, we've limited so many options. We need so much to be generating this energy of connection. You want to say one more word before I finish?
Me? Can I say
Yes,
that? I
yes.
just I just lost it.
Oh, you love.
Anyhow, about indigenous languages, I'm volunteering. I've been volunteering in the last 20 years with FEL, Foundation for Indigenous Languages. And then we had a conference in Ottawa in 2013. And after that, I was one of the 4 people who said, "Oh, we must do something here." And we founded FEL Canada, which you can find on the web or on Facebook. And I've been part of that actively for a long time. Now it's kind of hard because I live in Italy and there are lots of people on the West Coast. That makes 9-hour difference, and it's a problem to see because we have been working on web conferences. We have been holding this association by web on the web.
Thank you. And it's interesting that some of my colleagues at Carleton University are your colleagues via that network.
Yeah, Eric.
Yes, right. And Stone.
Say hello to him if you see him.
Yes, Andrew Stone.
Andrew Stone too. Yeah,
yes.
sure.
But so then let me just finish by saying, okay, you guys, you know, I met grandfather working in the criminal justice system. I spent a lot of time supporting his work, as many other people did. After he died, I went back to school to try and present a better understanding of grandfather's teachings. We did a PhD on his work. We did postdoctoral research, and we continue to do research in those other areas of cybernetics and cybercartography and photo atlasing. And I'm most grateful to my thesis supervisor at Carleton University, Professor Fraser Taylor, who met grandfather. Grandfather blessed the opening of one of their workshops in the evolving field of cybercartography in I think, gosh, 2007. And grandfather and I were both going to go to school together to transform his honorary doctorate degrees into something substantial. It was after his death that I was able to complete that commitment to him. And I continue to work there at Carleton University. And right now, we're engaged in a new project, Professor Taylor and myself and others, including with South Africa, children's mapping. So it's again a mapping story. It's a cartography story. It's a story of movement, and it's with children mapping their realities and their aspirations and their hopes for protection into the new world. We've been doing powerful work with students. I went to South Africa. Yes, indeed, Winnie. I presented with others at this International Cartographic Association conference. We did 5 presentations, and we brought the voice of children together into those presentations. But we also did a presentation on grandfather Commanda and the canoe, and so his voice is also part of that academic world, that geo GIS world of cartography. So yeah, so with that, I'll say, let's say we've launched the canoe for this session. Thank you guys so much for being here and for being so patient sitting through this. And I hope we reach people out there in the larger public, and we'll invite people to let us know if they're interested in joining these kinds of conversations, and we'll do it again. And all the best for this time of rebalancing and getting our energies right for the equinox as we move into the new phases in our lives. Miigwech so much. Thank you. Take good care.
Miigwech.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to end the Zoom, and I can talk to you guys on Messenger in about 5 minutes. Or else, yeah. Okay. Take care.
Record.
And now I'm back here on this page, and I wonder what there is to observe. I am going to end our live video.